He wasn't there to protect. He wasn't there to uphold the law. He was sent in when the system ran out of options, when the rules were no longer useful, and the criminals weren't afraid anymore. In Cobra, justice wasn't blind. It was armed, fast, and merciless. When it arrived in 1986, Cobra didn't follow the usual Stallone formula. This wasn't the underdog with a heart of gold, or the soldier fighting for a cause. This was pure reaction, brutal, efficient, and eerily silent. Stallone gave audiences a man who spoke in bullets and believed kindness was weakness. But what the world saw was already filtered. Beneath the tough guy one-liners and neon-lit carnage, there was another film one the studio buried before it ever reached theaters. A longer, bleaker version where Cobra wasn't a rogue hero, but something closer to a functioning sociopath, haunted by impulses he could barely control. A man shaped by the violence he claimed to fight. This unreleased cut became Hollywood legend. It was reportedly over 2 hours long, filled with scenes that exposed Cobra's fractured mind, his lack of empathy, and the growing sense that maybe he wasn't much different from the cult he hunted. The test audiences hated it. The studio panicked. And so, the scissors came out. What remains are scraps, promo stills, showing scenes we never saw, marketing lines that alluded to themes left unexplored. And the lingering question, why did they hide the version that might have shown Stallone at his most raw? These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about Cobra, a film that may have revealed more than anyone was ready to admit. Fact 1. The lost version that recast Cobra as something else. The theatrical cut of Cobra runs just under 90 minutes, tight, fast, and focused. But the film that was originally assembled in the editing room was more than 2 hours long, and its tone was drastically different. This wasn't just a longer version. It was a version where the central character felt almost inhuman. Reports from those who saw early test screenings describe a character spiraling into emotional detachment. Cobra barely spoke. He didn't comfort victims. He showed no regret after killing. One moment, now lost, reportedly showed him staring silently at a body for an extended beat, as if trying to feel something and failing. There were also scenes exploring his isolation, glimpses of a man living in shadows, disconnected from the very society he was tasked to protect. Stallone had leaned into this darker portrayal in his script, but when audiences reacted with confusion and discomfort, the studio demanded a total overhaul. Roughly 40 minutes were cut. Dialogue was rearranged. Violent outbursts were softened. The Cobra we know today is a remnant, reshaped into a marketable anti-hero. But the original character, the one Stallone initially wrote, may have looked a lot more like a villain than a savior. No official version of this cut has ever surfaced, but stills and early promo materials hint at scenes that don't exist in any home release. The full picture? Likely locked away in a vault or destroyed to protect what Cobra was never meant to become. Was this edit about runtime? Or about erasing a version of Stallone that audiences simply couldn't accept? Fact 2. The source material was much more disturbing. What many don't realize is that Cobra was born from a novel Fair Game by Paula Gosling. On the surface, the book is a straightforward crime thriller, but dig deeper, and you'll find a tone far bleaker and more morally ambiguous than what made it to screen. The novel's protagonist isn't a stoic action hero. He's deeply flawed, emotionally scarred, and operating on the edge of legality. Stallone reportedly responded to that darkness and began adapting the book with the intent of exploring a character fractured by the violence he dishes out. Early drafts of the screenplay followed this path. Cobra wasn't a guy with one-liners and a muscle car. He was withdrawn, erratic, and emotionally blunt. But as the project evolved, studio executives pushed back. They wanted clarity, simplicity, a hero the audience could cheer for. What resulted was a hybrid. Pieces of the original noir tone mixed with pulpy action. But if you know what to look for, you can still see the shadow of the source material. The long silences, the lack of empathy, the cult's vague ideology. It all echoes Fair Game's central theme that, sometimes, the people enforcing the law are more broken than the ones breaking it. A 1,995 film adaptation of Fair Game tried to stay closer to the book and failed miserably. Ironically, that failure only made Cobra look cleaner by comparison. But it also buried the idea that this film might have once had deeper, more uncomfortable questions at its core. Was Cobra meant to thrill or to unsettle? Fact 3. Audiences were disturbed by what they saw in the first cut. When test audiences were first shown Cobra in its original form, the reaction wasn't mild dislike, it was discomfort. People left the theater not offended by the gore, but chilled by the tone. There was something in the film that felt wrong. The early cut was described as emotionally vacant. Scenes lingered too long. Deaths felt too real. One removed sequence reportedly featured Cobra interrogating a suspect using methods that felt closer to psychological warfare than police work. There was no music, no cutaway, just silence and pressure. Executives sensed the danger. This version of Cobra wasn't just edgy, he was alienating. Viewers couldn't connect. There was no moral center, no light in the darkness. Even the cult, bizarre as it was, started to look more human by comparison. The studio's solution was swift: soften the character, streamline the narrative, and inject just enough levity to keep the audience grounded. Brigitte Nielsen's role was expanded, the pacing was tightened, violent moments were clipped for clarity, not for censorship, but for emotional distance. To this day, some involved in the production claim that the test screening footage no longer exists, that it was wiped clean to avoid leaks. Others believe someone, somewhere, still has a copy. Did the studio react to protect the audience or to preserve the brand that Stallone had spent years building? Fact 4. The Night Slasher's origins were rooted in real-world horror. Brian Thompson's portrayal of the Night Slasher remains one of the most disturbing elements of Cobra. His presence is cold, mechanical, and unrelenting, like a human embodiment of dread. But what most viewers never realized is that the character was heavily inspired by a real serial killer who, at the time, was dominating headlines. Richard Ramirez, better known as the Night Stalker, had recently been captured in California. His crimes were random, brutal, and carried an unsettling layer of satanic symbolism. The parallels between Ramirez and the Night Slasher were not coincidental. Stallone was reportedly fascinated by Ramirez's psychological detachment and sought to replicate that energy on screen. Lines in the film echo phrases Ramirez was said to have used during his trial. The slasher's ideology, chaos, destruction, survival of the fittest, mirrored some of the distorted philosophies found in Ramirez's writings. Thompson himself admitted in interviews that he studied real-life murderers to find the deadness in the eyes. This raised red flags for some on the crew. There were concerns that the villain was too realistic, too recognizable. The marketing team was told to downplay the cult angle in trailers and posters. Internally, discussions were had about whether the performance had crossed a line. Yet, that's precisely why the character has endured, because he doesn't feel like a creation. He feels like something the world already knew, something it would rather forget. Was the Night Slasher just a villain or a reflection of a horror that wasn't fictional at all? This raised red flags for some on the crew. There were concerns that the villain was too realistic, too recognizable. The marketing team was told to downplay the cult angle in trailers and posters. Internally, discussions were had about whether the performance had crossed a line. Yet, that's precisely why the character has endured, because he doesn't feel like a creation. He feels like something the world already knew, something it would rather forget. He spoke softly, made no eye contact, and when he finished, he simply sat in silence. Stallone was in the room. He allegedly leaned forward and said, "That's the one." From that moment, Thompson became the Night Slasher, not through stunt work or bravado, but through stillness. The kind of stillness that comes with conviction. On set, Thompson rarely broke character. He kept to himself. Crew members said they didn't know how to approach him, not out of fear, but because he never offered anything outside the role. Even between takes, he was distant, eyes unfocused. The role expanded. More scenes were written for him. But when the test screenings revealed audience discomfort, many of those moments were removed. The fear wasn't that people hated the villain. The fear was that they were fascinated by him. Was Thompson playing a part, or had he simply found something inside himself that the film didn't dare fully reveal? Fact 6. Stallone censored the film himself to protect an image. Sylvester Stallone had more than just star power on Cobra. He had creative authority as writer, lead actor, and the final voice in the editing room. But when the early cut of the film landed badly with test audiences, it wasn't studio executives who made the first drastic changes. It was Stallone. Insiders say Stallone entered the editing suite personally and began removing key scenes. Not the action, not the blood, but the emotional core, the parts of the film that showed Cobra's inner turmoil, moral confusion, and emotional detachment. Scenes where he spoke in whispers, broke down, or failed to act when someone begged for help. Why remove them? According to a former editor, Stallone feared these moments made Cobra look too unstable, too broken. He didn't want the character to resemble a villain, or worse, to to reflect a part of himself that fans wouldn't recognize. It's a paradox. The very scenes that may have elevated Cobra into psychological territory were the ones the film's creator decided to cut. For brand preservation? Maybe. For control? Almost certainly. One crew member described the deleted footage as the most vulnerable we've ever seen Stallone, and it's never coming back. Was it the right call? Or did Stallone sacrifice something personal in exchange for the safety of his myth? Fact 7. Were real cultists hiding in the crowd? One of the most chilling rumors surrounding Cobra didn't come from the script, it came from the set. During the filming of the cult scenes, specifically those featuring the axe-clanging rituals, whispers began to circulate among the crew that some of the extras weren't actors at all. According to one assistant director, several background performers were cast through an open call agency known for recruiting authentic faces. What they got, reportedly, were individuals who refused direction, brought their own wardrobe, and chanted lines that weren't in the script, lines that sounded eerily doctrinal. At first, the production chalked it up to method acting, but over time, it became clear these individuals weren't breaking character because they weren't playing one. Some began preaching between takes. One even left behind flyers with hand-drawn symbols and a manifesto titled Purification of the Weak. Though no official investigation was launched, several of these extras were quietly removed from set after complaints. Their names were scrubbed from the call sheets. Their footage was minimal, if used at all. Was this a bizarre coincidence, or did Cobra accidentally become a magnet for real-life believers in violent ideology? And if so, where did the performance end and something else begin? Fact 8. The scissors scene that vanished into urban legend. Among the many lost moments from Cobra, one stands out for its sheer mythos. The ritualistic killing with golden scissors, shot in a dimly lit warehouse with candles lining the floor and cult members chanting in rhythmic unison. According to multiple crew sources, this scene was designed to open the film to establish the cult's brutality, but also their ceremonial structure. The victim, tied to a chair and blindfolded, was stabbed slowly in a pattern meant to symbolize rebirth. The sequence was reportedly so intense that those watching dailies in post-production were visibly disturbed. The studio moved quickly. The scene was cut from the theatrical version entirely. No images were released. Not even stills made it to press kits. Those who saw it claimed it felt too real, crossing the line from stylized violence into something that resembled a documented ritual. Rumors of a bootleg VHS containing the footage have circulated for years, but no authenticated copy has ever surfaced. Some claim it was intentionally destroyed. Others believe it's still locked away, too dangerous or too controversial to release. Was this just another over-the-top horror set piece, or did it touch on imagery so visceral, even Hollywood backed away? Fact 9. Brigitte Nielsen was cast as much for optics as for story. Brigitte Nielsen's appearance in Cobra wasn't just a romantic subplot, it was a calculated decision, both personally and publicly. At the time, Nielsen was married to Stallone, and including her in the film was seen as a way to create balance within an otherwise relentlessly grim narrative. Originally, her character was minor, a plot device, not a personality. But after early screenings, where viewers found Stallone's character too robotic, the studio insisted on adding moments of connection. Nielsen's screen time increased. Light dialogue was written in. Flirtation was added not because the story needed it, but because the audience needed a human anchor. The irony is that Stallone and Nielsen's relationship was reportedly falling apart during the shoot. Off-screen tension made its way into the performances, creating an awkward energy the camera couldn't entirely hide. Critics were quick to point out the artificial chemistry, but it didn't matter. Her presence softened the tone, made Cobra seem reachable, and offered contrast to the film's darkness. Was she cast to enrich the story, or to save a character on the verge of becoming inhuman? Fact 10. The supermarket showdown was once twice as long. The supermarket hostage sequence is arguably Cobra's most iconic scene, a no-nonsense introduction to a character who doesn't negotiate. But the version that audiences saw was a trimmed-down version of a much longer, far more unsettling opening. Early edits of the film reportedly featured an extended build-up. The gunman stalked the aisles longer, delivering rambling threats that felt eerily grounded in anti-government paranoia. Meanwhile, Cobra was shown sitting in his car, assembling his weapon slowly, as if enjoying the anticipation. When he finally enters, the pacing wasn't fast, it was deliberate. He moved through the aisles like a predator. One removed shot even showed him pausing to stare at a wounded civilian, not with concern but with a kind of cold calculation. It made people uneasy. The final kill was also different. Instead of a clean, quick shot, Cobra reportedly stood over the gunman, whispering something before pulling the trigger, a line that no longer exists in any released version. Why was it shortened? Studio executives feared it would alienate audiences not because of the violence, but because of how detached and inhuman Cobra appeared. They wanted him to be efficient, not monstrous, but those who saw the full cut insist it was one of the most haunting action scenes ever shot, not because of what happened, but because of what it implied. Was this a heroic moment or the first warning that Cobra wasn't who we thought he was? Fact 11. The film nearly sparked panic over extremist influence. Cobra's villains weren't just movie monsters. The cult's vague ideology, survival of the strongest, destruction of the weak mirrored language found in real-life fringe groups that were active in the 1,980 seconds, and that's exactly what made the studio nervous. Early cuts of the film reportedly featured scenes where cult members distributed leaflets, held secret meetings, and tried to infiltrate local institutions. One particularly risky subplot, later removed, involved a corrupt judge protecting them, suggesting their network extended beyond the streets. Lawyers at Warner Brothers flagged these elements. They feared that Cobra might be interpreted as glorifying or validating real extremist rhetoric, especially since some of the cult's speeches closely echoed writings from known domestic terror suspects. As a result, major edits were made, scenes were deleted, dialogue was softened, and the marketing team was instructed to shift focus away from the cult entirely. The posters highlighted Stallone, not the threat. The trailer emphasized action, not ideology, but the fingerprints of the original intent remain. You can still hear it in the Night Slasher's monologues. You can feel it in the cold structure of the rituals. The cult may have lost its name and its backstory, but not its unsettling realism. Was the studio protecting audiences from offense, or from recognizing a reflection of something uncomfortably close to home? Fact 12. The factory used in the climax was deemed unsafe afterwards, but the fingerprints of the original intent remain. You can still hear it in the Night Slasher's monologues. You can feel it in the cold structure of the rituals. The cult may have lost its name and its backstory, but not its unsettling realism. Early cuts of the film reportedly featured scenes where cult members distributed leaflets, held secret meetings, and tried to infiltrate local institutions. One particularly risky subplot, later removed, involved a corrupt judge protecting them, suggesting their network extended beyond the streets. Shortly after filming wrapped, the facility was officially condemned. Inspections revealed asbestos, exposed electrical hazards, and structural failures. Several crew members later reported respiratory issues. A few pursued medical compensation, though no public lawsuit was ever filed. The film's brutal final act, Cobra's confrontation with the Night Slasher, unfolds inside a nightmarish industrial setting. With its rusted catwalks, churning furnaces, and echoing emptiness, the location feels perfectly sinister. That's because it was real, and it was also dangerous. Adding to the building's legacy of dread, rumors spread that it had been the site of multiple workplace deaths decades earlier, and that a body had been discovered near the site just weeks after the crew left. No report confirmed this, but the legend stuck. Was it just a location? Or was the evil in Cobra amplified by the ghosts of where it was filmed? Fact 13. The motorcycle chase was a hasty patch to save the ending. The explosive motorcycle chase near the end of Cobra feels like a natural climax high-speed pursuit, crashing vehicles, fireballs. But behind the scenes, it was never supposed to be there. That sequence was written and filmed in crisis mode, just weeks before the final cut was due. Originally, the film ended on a darker, tighter note, a psychological face-off in the shadows, where Cobra confronts the Night Slasher, not with fists, but with silence, tension, and ambiguity. But after test audiences complained that the film lacked big action, the studio demanded a more traditional third act. The production scrambled. Stallone and his team sketched out a rough draft for a chase, set in industrial wastelands and framed like a demolition derby. Locations were secured in a day, stunt drivers had limited prep time, and the sequence was shot in less than a week, with multiple near misses and a serious on-set crash that sent one crew member to the hospital. What resulted was undeniably thrilling, but it also shifted the film's tone. Where the original ending might have lingered in moral ambiguity, the added chase leaned heavily into spectacle fire over psychology. action over introspection. Watch closely, and the seams are visible. The lighting changes, the pacing stutters. The score suddenly swells into something that doesn't quite match the rest of the film. Was it necessary? Maybe. But it came at the cost of the narrative Stallone had first envisioned. Did Cobra need more firepower or just the courage to end in silence? Fact 14. Stallone's off-camera silence was louder than his lines. On set, Sylvester Stallone wasn't talkative, but during Cobra, his silence took on a new dimension. Crew members described entire shooting days where Stallone spoke no words to anyone, maintaining the same blank stare and stiff posture between takes as he did in front of the camera. Did Cobra need more firepower or just the courage to end in silence? Fact 14. Stallone's off-camera silence was louder than his lines. Even the director started blocking scenes around Stallone's presence, adjusting camera positions and timing to account for his growing detachment. Some felt it added to the mystique, others called it toxic, but no one denied its impact. Stallone's performance in Cobra is among his most minimalist. Few words, fewer expressions, and an eerie stillness that never quite fades. Was this method acting taken to the extreme, or was Stallone channeling something closer to who he really was at the time? Fact 15. Cobra was cited in a real-life murder case. In 1987, Cobra made headlines for reasons no one expected. A defense attorney in a murder trial cited the film as part of the defendant's psychological unraveling, claiming that repeated viewings of Stallone's performance had fueled violent fantasies that eventually turned deadly. The case involved a young man accused of a brutal assault and killing. When investigators searched his home, they reportedly found a VHS copy of Cobra paused at a scene featuring the night slasher. Drawings discovered in his journal included crude recreations of axe-wielding figures and cultic symbols. In court, the defense argued that the film's depiction of violence framed as cleansing, as righteous, had deeply influenced an already unstable mind. Psychiatric experts were brought in to analyze the character of Cobra, with some calling him a moral vacuum in a police uniform. The prosecution pushed back. They argued that blaming a movie was a distraction. Ultimately, the jury agreed. The defendant was convicted, but the story went public, and Cobra's name was suddenly attached to a real-life act of violence. Warner Brothers declined to comment. Stallone remained silent. But behind the scenes, the studio reportedly became far more cautious about marketing the film in future re-releases. Did the movie inspire a killer, or did it merely expose the fact that some viewers saw in Cobra not a warning, but a blueprint? Fact 16. The tagline that crossed a line. The case involved a young man accused of a brutal assault and killing. When investigators searched his home, they reportedly found a VHS copy of Cobra paused at a scene featuring the night slasher. Drawings discovered in his journal included crude recreations of axe-wielding figures and cultic symbols. The original tagline, according to internal notes, was, "You don't ask for justice, you survive it." It framed Cobra not as a savior, but as a threat, the last thing standing between society and collapse. Marketing executives pushed back. They feared it sent the wrong message, that Cobra wasn't about a hero, but about unchecked force. With public conversations already heating up around police brutality and authoritarianism, the last thing Warner Brothers wanted was controversy. It framed Cobra not as a savior, but as a threat, the last thing standing between society and collapse. Marketing executives pushed back. They feared it sent the wrong message, that Cobra wasn't about a hero, but about unchecked force. With public conversations already heating up around police brutality and authoritarianism, the last thing Warner Brothers wanted was controversy. Still, the original tagline lingers as a glimpse into Stallone's true vision for the film. Not justice in uniform, but justice without apology. Was it too aggressive for mainstream audiences or too honest for the kind of hero Hollywood wanted Stallone to be? Fact 17. The cult was originally the film's central engine. In the final cut of Cobra, the cult feels like an atmospheric threat, ominous, mysterious, but underdeveloped. That wasn't the original plan. Early drafts positioned the New Order as a fully formed, ideologically driven movement, meant to be as important to the narrative as Cobra himself. Scripts included entire scenes of indoctrination. New recruits were shown being stripped of identity, taught to reject empathy, and handed weapons as rites of passage. Their structure mirrored real-world extremist cells, hierarchies, rituals, and a unified code built around strength over compassion. One deleted scene even had the cult infiltrating a police department, hinting at systemic corruption. But studio execs panicked. They worried that the script bore too many resemblances to contemporary political groups, some of which were already making headlines for violent rhetoric. So the cult was stripped down. No names, no doctrine, just clanging axes, dark warehouses, and glimpses of something larger that never fully emerged. The threat was no longer ideological, just visual. What's left is a fragmented portrait, one that suggests a vast network but delivers only shadows. Still, if you look closely, their fingerprints are everywhere in the structure, in the silence, in the sense that this was supposed to be bigger. Did the studio remove their story for clarity or to avoid triggering an audience already too close to the real thing? In the final cut of Cobra, the cult feels like an atmospheric threat, ominous, mysterious, but underdeveloped. That wasn't the original plan. Early drafts positioned the New Order as a fully formed, ideologically driven movement, meant to be as important to the narrative as Cobra himself. When Cobra made the jump to network television, producers faced a dilemma. To meet censorship standards, they had to cut violence, profanity, and several intense scenes. But trimming content left time gaps. So editors turned to the archives, and what they pulled out surprised even the crew. Did the studio remove their story for clarity or to avoid triggering an audience already too close to the real thing? One deleted scene even had the cult infiltrating a police department, hinting at systemic corruption. But studio execs panicked. They worried that the script bore too many resemblances to contemporary political groups, some of which were already making headlines for violent rhetoric. Strangely, these additions were never preserved. Most existed only in regional broadcast tapes, many of which were erased or lost. Bootleg VHS copies have surfaced, but the quality is poor, and no official release has acknowledged the material. Did the TV version accidentally show us what Cobra was originally meant to be, or just give us a glimpse of a man who didn't make it into the final cut? Fact 19. The original ending was never about victory. The theatrical ending of Cobra wraps things up with a familiar rhythm. The villain is dead, the girl is safe, and the hero rides off with the sun at his back. But in early versions of the script, there was no sense of triumph, just loss, regret, and silence. In Stallone's first draft, the night slasher escapes the final confrontation. Cobra chases him, but is too late to stop him from killing Ingrid, who dies in Cobra's arms in the factory. No last kiss, no final words. Just a man watching the one thing he tried to protect slip away. The last scene? Cobra driving alone through the desert, badge discarded on the dashboard, his gun locked in the glove compartment. No score, no dialogue, just the sound of wind and nothing else. Executives shut it down immediately. Test audiences reacted with unease, and the studio didn't want to risk alienating fans used to seeing Stallone win. The ending was reshot to feel cleaner, but a few pieces of the original survived, including a moment where Cobra stares blankly while others celebrate. A beat that doesn't quite fit the scene because it wasn't meant to. This wasn't just a darker ending, it was an entirely different statement, one that suggested justice doesn't always arrive on time, and that sometimes the cure fails the very person it was meant to save. Was the rewrite about hope or about protecting a myth? Fact 20. The custom Cobra car was stolen and never recovered. One of the film's most iconic elements isn't a line or a kill, it's the jet black 1950 Mercury Monterey, customized into something between a muscle car and a war machine. Sleek, aggressive, and near silent, the car became a visual extension of Cobra himself. But shortly after filming, it disappeared. The vehicle was scheduled for promotional appearances following the film's release. But days before its first showing, the transport company reported that the car had gone missing in transit. Some assumed it was a clerical error. Others suspected it was stolen. Over the years, rumors grew. One stuntman claimed a former crew member drove it off the lot and never returned. Another source suggested it was taken as a form of compensation after disputes over unpaid bonuses. The studio filed a quiet report, but no recovery was ever made. Occasional sightings popped up, always in vague terms. A car collector swore he saw it at an illegal race event in Nevada. Another claimed it turned up at a private collection in Eastern Europe. None of the leads were confirmed. Stallone has only addressed it once, joking in an interview that maybe Cobra took it with him. But those close to production suspect the car's disappearance wasn't a prank or a coincidence. It was a trophy taken by someone who believed the car was never meant to be stored. The vehicle was scheduled for promotional appearances following the film's release, but days before its first showing, the transport company reported that the car had gone missing in transit. Some assumed it was a clerical error. Others suspected it was stolen. Bonus fact: a sequel script was written, then buried. Most people assume Cobra was a one-and-done project, a brutal outlier in Stallone's filmography, never intended to be revisited. But in reality, a sequel concept did exist. and the story it told would have taken the franchise into even darker territory. Titled Cobra: Shadow Wars, the project was never officially announced, but insiders confirmed that Stallone had written a detailed treatment. The story followed a disillusioned Cobra, years after the events of the first film, now operating in the shadows for a covert task force tasked with dismantling homegrown terror cells. Bonus fact: a sequel script was written, then buried. The pitch made it to a few producers. Reactions were cautious. Some found it too bleak, too political. Others feared it would fracture Stallone's image as a larger-than-life hero. And quietly, Shadow Wars disappeared. Some speculate that fragments of it were recycled, that the DNA of the script found its way into Demolition Man or Judge Dredd, both of which touch on themes of state control and the cost of order. But Cobra: Shadow Wars, as originally envisioned, remains locked away, unread, unfinished, and never spoken of again. Was it a missed opportunity, or a story Stallone was never truly ready to tell? Cobra might have ended in fire and fury, but beneath the surface, it was always something colder, a film haunted by the version we never got to see. A cut that redefined its hero, and maybe redefined Stallone himself. Now it's your turn. Do you think the original, unreleased cut would have made Cobra a cult masterpiece, or pushed it too far into darkness? And what other hidden cuts, discarded visions, or buried performances should we uncover next? Subscribe to Behind the Fact, where every reel has a shadow and every legend hides something that didn't make it to screen.